He is a journalist, author, an editor, and has an experienced moderator. And he has lived in many areas, so he'll bring definitely an interesting perspective to this conversation. So please start making your way up to the stage, as well as the panelists. In the panel, we have Panelists, who is the Director of Planning and Development for Monroe County. We have Abby McHugh-Griffa, the Executive Director of Climate Solutions Accelerator. Rich Perrin, the Commissioner of, lost my place. Commissioner of Department of Environmental Services for the City of Rochester. I should know that already. And Miguel Velasquez, Deputy CEO of Rochester Genesee Regional Transportation Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. Now, come right on in.
Thank you.
I'll start with Abby. So, the film we just saw, it says you were kind of on the verge of this revolution, right? So my first question to all of you will be, what are you doing in your work to try to make that revolution happen? So I'll start with you. But this is also your chance to just kind of talk about what your organization is doing in general.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Addie. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And really want to just appreciate everyone for taking the time to learn about this issue, think about this stuff. It's super important. For us as an organization, we are an inclusive, nonpartisan climate advocacy organization focused on catalyzing local efforts to address emissions. And, transportation is the leading source of emissions in our region at about 33% of the total. So there is a lot of work to do. I like the idea of thinking about it as a revolution. And of course, this film provides a lot of food for thought in terms of what is even possible. So that, thinking is outside the box, and I'm excited to have the conversation with everyone here tonight about what we could do, where we could go. It's great.
Thank you. And Anna, would you like to, if you take the question too, what are you doing in your role to, help this revolution come to pass?
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm the Director of Planning and Development for Monroe County. My boss is Monroe County Executive Adam Bello. And thank you. I want to take a moment to recognize Pat Gooch and Ishan Lin from our planning division, who you may have seen out in the corridor before the film here, promoting public engagement in our countywide active transportation plan. I'm here tonight because for the first time ever, Monroe County is moving forward with developing a countywide active transportation plan, and that's under the direction and leadership, thank you, of County Executive Fellow. And we have a team of really compassionate planners on our staff, Pat and Ishan being leaders among them. While a planning effort is really, that's all it is. You're putting pen to paper, you're talking to the public, you're working with stakeholders, you're essentially doing a homework assignment, and you're looking ahead 10, 20 years into the future. It's not an effort that will result in a silver bullet that helps answer some of these tough questions. It's a really huge step forward in the work that the county is doing to build a brighter future for Monroe County. So we're really grateful to be here tonight and to work together with all the partners that are present, including Reconnect Rochester.
Thank you. And Rich, I'll ask you now. What in your role? What are you doing for the revolution?
Yeah, so I would echo Anna's comments in the sense that a lot of this comes down to what we're doing to begin to plan for these things, and that has to be inclusive of a very robust public engagement process. And so we also have an active transportation plan that's under development, that's in close coordination with the counties. The county is interesting in that they really need to serve a diverse set of needs, right? I mean, it's not just how they interact with us, the city of Rochester, but it's also the the suburban and rural elements too. So in a way, I think we have it a bit easier. But I also would go so far as to say that, when Mayor Malik Evans speaks about his vision for Rochester, he talks about a safe, equitable, and prosperous city. Excuse me. And in looking at this, I don't know how us transforming our transportation system doesn't meet every one of those. Safe, equitable, and prosperous. And he also wants it done in a sustainable manner. So when we start looking at this, the mayor is very big. We have a number of projects going on. We have major projects, significant projects that are part of an overall program of Rock the Riverway, where we're going to start turning our faces back to the river rather than having our backs to it. So that's also very critical. And when you look at the projects that we're doing in that manner, a big one is the Aqueduct Reimagined. The aqueduct is really represents our past, our present, and our future. And when we get done with that project, there won't be vehicular traffic on it at all. It will be an iconic public space. It will be a gathering space, and it will be able to be served by all modes. And as we continue to do that, and we look at tearing down highways and rebuilding them in a more not only sustainable, but just a human scale, things that make sense, that's the Interloop North. That's $100 million that the state of New York committed to us to be able to say, no, you had a vision, you extended it to us. And one of the things I thought was interesting was one of the speakers had said the idea that, when you get that success, and it might have been the mayor of Bogota, that's what we did with Interloop East. And it's not to say that that's perfect. There's improvements we can make, and we will. But we're learning from it, and now we're taking on a project that's going to be about 4 times the size. So the Rochester that we're not just planning for, but also building right now is going to be transformative, and it's going to be a place that, children today, won't have any idea what it looks like now. And ideally, that's going to raise everybody so that we have the same outcomes, regardless of age, income, ability, race. That's what we're after. And transportation is going to play a major role in that. But it's also about our future and the sustainable path that we need to set ourselves on, that we have. We have a climate action plan, I should add too, that we're also updating and completing a vehicle or an emission inventory, including for vehicles. But no, at the Department of Environmental Services, we cover a lot of this. So a lot of this is under our purview. We take it seriously. That's what we come to work every day to do and make better. So, and I have to acknowledge a partnership that we also have with RTS as well. And that's absolutely critical. So with that, I'll stop and we can get into more of sort of some of the thoughts on the actual movie as we get into the questions. But
Great. Miguel, also, what are you doing at the transit before the revolution? What's your next steps?
Yeah, thank you everyone. My name is Miguel Velasquez, Deputy CEO for RTS, which probably I don't have to explain what we do, but we do serve a county area. And we're trying at least to work very hard to meet the new customer demands and expectations of a new generation and doing many of the things that you saw in that film. And it's, I think kind of hit it right on the head. I mean, there is no one silver bullet for this unique collaboration. And as weird as this may sound, even when in the past they've had transportation plans, this is the first time I can remember that both the county and the city have called us and said, you need to be at the table for these conversations and for us to develop this plan. So thank you very much.
I'm going to go back to you, Miguel. So I'm just checking my notes there. I wrote down some stats for your website. So if I'm wrong, I got it from the website. You guys provide a vital service. I read you provide about 15 million rides per year. Is that right? With the bus system?
So unfortunately, that was pre-COVID.
Okay.
So it is wrong. But yeah, that pre-COVID, we moved around 50 million people a year, about 1.2 a month. We are right now, even though it's trending up, which is a great thing, but we are about, I would say, 54 to 60% ridership of what we were before COVID.
So I'd expect a lot of people who take the bus, I assume that's their only real transit option. What are you guys doing to, give them better frequency, give them better service? What's kind of coming for people who rely on the bus?
Thank you for that question, because as many of you know, a year and a month at this point, actually a year and a month tomorrow, we launched our Reimagined RTS. And that's when we really overhauled a 40-year-old system. So for 40 years, we had a system that we hardly ever changed. We, cut service in some areas, added some splinters to a route, but never really looked at what does this community really need, given the change of, not having Kodak is what it used to be, and Xerox and other businesses around here. So anyways, we went through that transformation, and I guess one of the main features is exactly that, is we know that in order to attract people to public transportation, you have to make it convenient. And convenience is a matter of how far do people have to walk and how frequent that service is and how reliable it is. So what we've done is create a system that we think it's more convenient, reliable, connected, with 10 routes that, as you know, the original plan, we launched with 10 routes that ran every 15 minutes. Unfortunately, we had to cut that back to meet a community crisis, but we will get back there, and the rest of the routes every 30 minutes. So that is part of the plan, but more importantly, we cannot, and we're not trying to think of ourselves, or we're trying not to think of ourselves as a transportation business. We're trying to think of ourselves as a mobility business. It's not just buses, and as you know, it's not just 40-foot buses. Now we have on-demand service, working with the city very closely to have a bike share, make sure bike share didn't go away, and have e-bikes and have scooters. And there's other mobility options. We're bringing tricycles soon for people with disabilities. So that will happen in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And there are other mobility options. You saw it on the film. And there's probably others that we're not thinking about. So all those things coming together, working with the city, because it's not only about vehicles, whatever they may look like, but also the design of the city, making sure that taking any of these forms of transportation is safe, convenient, and reliable.
Great. And I'll turn to Rich now and ask you, so to work with the transit agency, we heard a little bit about transit-oriented design in the film development. Sorry, is that something the city's looking at? Are you looking at putting in new, residential sites where there is transit? Where are some plans in that area?
Yeah, I mean, the real benefit of this city is that we are well served by transit. We have that because of the density, and I think that's a very important element of it. We're currently going through our zoning alignment project, or ZAP, so that's looking at what we can do. But again, a lot of that comes down to equity. We have good partners over at RTS that we're always happy to work with. It's been a very good relationship, I think, for a number of years, and particularly with me coming from a transportation background and knowing Miguel for, let's not get into that. No, so there's a lot, and it's interesting because this is really where when I watch this film, it always reminds me of where the issue occurred, and it was a lack of not just coordination but collaboration between land use and transportation. These two things operate very, very differently in the sense that, and this isn't necessarily pertaining to the city only. I think it pertains to our entire country. Those land use decisions are typically made by public sector entities, and they are carried out though by the private sector. And the private sector moves at a very quick pace, whereas the infrastructure is solely within the domain, for the most part, of the public sector, and it doesn't move at as quick a pace. So what you end up having is you have the demand being created by those land uses, the private sector, and supply, which is a somewhat finite, slowly expanding resource being provided by the public sector. And basic economics tells us when demand outstrips supply, we end up with issues. Or when the supply doesn't provide what the demand is asking for, we end up with this. I would say too that I'm also reminded, they talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He also had the golden hammer rule. I think there's a different name for it, but I think from transportation, we've been in the golden hammer mode for way too long. And what I mean by that is the golden hammer is if all you have is a hammer, then the solution is always a nail. And so that's what it was. It was always, well, we've got, congestion, delay, a problem, safety issues. We'll just build more lanes. We know that didn't work. Somebody on the film mentioned induced demand. That's a phenomenon that's been well proven. The one that's now being proven though is also called the disappearance effect. what the disappearance effect says is when you reduce capacity, some trips just don't occur anymore, or they occur at different times. So when we look at things like Interloop North and being able to build the land use and open up ideally over 20 acres of development, 4 times the size, almost 30 potentially, 4 times the size of Interloop East, we get a real chance to make some changes there. And it doesn't always have to be, high rises. No, we want a diversity of mixes, and we want things like parks. We want those places, and we want to look at how we work with Reconnect Rochester, how we work with RTS on that seating that's so absolutely critical for people who are waiting for the bus. I'd also be remiss, and he's in the audience, if I didn't mention Jim Stack over at the Genesee Transportation Council, which for some of the people in here you probably know, but for years, going back to really the early 2000s, and I was there, but GTC really started this idea of everything from a priority trails advancement program to making very strategic investments with federal dollars in bicycle and pedestrian as well as transit. I mean, that's the transit center got built with those federal dollars, including some that could have gone to highways. So Jim's over there, but yeah, I mean, it's something that we're fortunate to have in this region, and the fact that it continued after the last director left. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'll ask Donna now. So obviously you have a very different built environment from the city. Are there places where you're looking at? I'd say the Interloop build is kind of a trans-oriented development, right? You're making a space.
Answer your question. I'm sorry about that. I kind of went off on it, but sorry.
You kind of did.
Yeah,
Right?
I started with the zoning and then I went where I went. Sorry.
The loop, I do think that's a pretty good example of transit development. It's well served by transit lines. You're bringing a lot of housing there. And I'm curious, are there comparable things you're doing in the county? Maybe not the same scale, but just places where you're trying to make them possible to build more apartments, more housing.
Yes, absolutely. So in County Executive Bellow's transition report, I covered a lot of ground in that document, and it was pre-COVID, believe it or not, over 2.5 years ago. It goes into some detail about changing the mindset and the philosophy at the county level around transportation infrastructure and just in general around planning and development, thinking about building for pedestrians, thinking of, he specifically called for an active transportation plan for this purpose. So in theory and in practice, yes, but it's going to be a long-term effort, because when you look at suburban Monroe County, the whole built environment is for vehicles and single-family homes. So I don't see it changing overnight, of course, but because of things like climate change and the changing economy, I see climate change actually being a driver of a new climate migration, being a boon to Greater Rochester because of the fact that we're relatively protected from some of the more dangerous impacts of climate change in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. So we're just going to have to change how we look at planning and zoning. So the update to the county-wide comprehensive plan, which is the first time we've updated it in over 40 years. Another thing that County Executive Bellow campaigned on, and was in his transition report, something our planning division is working on. That's happening in tandem with the active transportation plan, in tandem with the climate action plan. We're working collaboratively with the city of Rochester for the first time in many, many years. It's just, I don't want to say kumbaya because that's kind of Pollyanna-ish, but things are moving in the right direction.
So that's great. It sounds like with the combo of doing the zoning and the active transportation plan together, you can say things like, we should probably think about rezoning this parcel to allow greater density because it's on the bus line. That type of
Yes. And a lot of big economic development projects are in the pipeline. One being the Amazon project out in the town of Gates. I brought this up on our radio program on Connections with Scott Fibush on WXXI yesterday. We appreciate a really productive working relationship with RGRTA and RTS. And when large job creation opportunities like that happen, we can pick up the phone, connect the developer, the business with the transit authority, and sit around the table and talk about how we can connect workers to job sites, one project at a time.
That's great, thank you.
Yes.
And so you touched on climate a little bit, so I'm going to turn to Abby now. And from that climate perspective, what are some solutions or some possibilities that you've identified with the climate action group?
Great question, thank you. So, I would put it in two big buckets. One being reducing vehicle miles traveled. A lot of different ways to do that, many of which have already been mentioned. But we also need to think, really outside the box, things like rural broadband, right? Working remotely is more of a thing now. We need to enable that. Make sure from an equity perspective, jobs, all kinds of reasons why that is a climate solution, though it may feel a bit removed, right? But so reducing vehicle miles traveled as being priority number one, and there definitely is a ranking here. And priority number two being electrifying those remaining miles. And so switching, that RTS is doing such great work. Really, really exciting to see the progress that is already happening in our community in that regard. But to switch to electric vehicles, electric buses, when we cannot eliminate the need to at this point. So like short term, long term, of course, we'd be looking at different time horizons here. But in the short term, those would be the two big priorities that I would identify. And just, I want to make sure we touch on one aspect of the movie that really jumped out to me as important. It talks about designing our transportation system around people, not cars, establishes that quite clearly. What maybe it doesn't dig into quite deeply enough for me is designing that system specifically to serve those who have been historically marginalized and not served well by the system. So thinking about this really as an equity issue and looking to prioritize those users of the transit system as, again, kind of top of the hierarchy.
And that's one of the things the film I actually left a little bit worried about was kind of the technology's great, and so often I think we see technology actually drive, right, just like the car, actually drove social inequities. So it's good to hear that we're all thinking about that as we look at these possible solutions.
Can I add one other thing to that too? And really just to call out some of the good work that is happening to engage the community and make sure that these decisions are driven by real input from real people who use the system. And so that is happening. And for those people who are in the audience who care about this stuff, engaging in their processes, like when they ask you to fill out the survey, fill out the survey, please. Go to that public meeting, talk about why this is important for the community, because there are voices on the other side that would really like to have us just continue relying on the car. So those who care, please engage. Please speak up, it's important.
Thank you for saying that, Abby, because we have on June 29th at Olmsted Lodge at Highland Park, the county's doing a big public engagement workshop focused on our active transportation plan and also on the comprehensive plan. And we'd love to have you come out and have your voices heard. In light of what you just said, Isha and Lynn from our planning division and I tabled for the active transportation plan at the Lilac Festival. We had a lot of folks coming up to the table and engaging with our map that we had and filling out comments. One of whom uses a scooter to get around, and she came over and thanked us and said, nobody's ever asked for my opinion about how difficult it is to get around. She talked about potholes on the sidewalks, and anyhow, you raised a really important point. We need to get the word out and make sure that people are involved in these plans, because the plans are only as good as the voices that contribute to them.
So I feel like we've talked about a lot of carrots to incentivize behavior change, but just along that theme of trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled, I think a lot of the places they showed there are places where it's not very easy to drive everywhere, parking is difficult, gas costs a lot more than it does here. Cars are harder to buy. I'll ask Rich first, are there sticks that the city can use? Are there things you guys are considering that would make it a little bit harder to drive everywhere in Rochester?
I wouldn't say, I mean, we're certainly not looking at cordon or congestion pricing or anything like that. You made a great point, which is that not all cities are the same. One of the things that when we talk about doing this is that, I like to refer to it as we're doing place making, not place copying. We can't just take what somebody else did in the community and do it. I would say, we'll use the carrot, we'll use as many carrots as we can. I don't know that we've come up with a stick yet to say, like, you've got to get out of your car. A lot of it is offering it. I mean, when they talk about these cities growing so much in density, the city of Rochester did grow for the first time in about 50 years between the last 2 decennial censuses. So that's censuses, whatever. Point being is we saw an uptick, and we feel that if we continue to make viable options available, that will happen. One of the things that DES is responsible for our operations bureau, is making sure that we maintain the vacant lots. And I had no idea how many vacant lots there were in the city. And obviously we offer those up for community gardens. So long as somebody wants to take care of them, we'll provide some of the supplies. We do our clean sweep and then our multiple mini sweeps. But as you asked that, I'm sitting here and I guess that's not it. That's just not something that we've gotten to a point yet where we feel like we're going to be able to reduce VMT through that. I would say let's get to a point where we're offering as many options as we can, both from a modal standpoint as well as the facilities to use them. And Abby brings up a good point. I mean, as we do the climate action plan, we're also looking at a fleet modernization component to that. So where can we become electrified? Where can we have alternative powered vehicles that we're going to be using as our own fleet? So, as we start to do that, I think let's get. I'd like to get to a point where we have to worry about like the sticks, and sometimes carrot is just a stick painted orange too. So we have to present it a different way so we don't get too many people coming after us.
Yeah. Well, back on the carrots and back to the electric vehicles, are there plans to electrify the streetscape to put in charging stations?
Well, that's the infrastructure we need, and we're actually working on it now. I mean, I'm much more patient with others than I am with myself. So I have to remind myself it's been 5 months and 16 days that we've been at this, and a lot of the things like the Interloop North planning study are things that we've kind of inherited, as well as a pilot program for electric vehicle or shared mobility via electric vehicles. But no, we have to start putting in that infrastructure, and that's always been the biggest issue. I mean, from the time anything other than gas came out, going back, there was what was termed range anxiety. You could be driving a clean natural gas or even electric vehicle, and you look at it and go, the battery says 75%. It says I've got 200 miles left. I don't trust it. So when we build that, we really have to do that, and we need to figure out, again, not to stick, but how do we incentivize that for private development? And that's something that neighborhood and business development is working on and figuring out how we do that. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be financial. One thought that I've thrown out there is if we get a private development and they say, you know what, we're going to put in 8 charging stations. We might not give them any money, but let's move them to the top of the list. Let's get that going for approvals. Let's get an expedited approval process. So I think there's things out there that we can talk about doing, but no, so much of it is going to be that. And again, we keep coming back to it. It's that equity issue, and that's really what it has to be. So you mentioned it, but Morgan Stanley did this great analysis where they showed the traditional view of automobiles, and they'd say, okay, we sold however many millions at $17,000 a unit worldwide, and they said that ends up being X amount. When you look at it as 75 cents, $1 per mile, that's now a completely different market that, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, makes it much more attractive. And that also allows people who can't afford that vehicle but can't afford trips to buy trips as they need them and not have all of the ownership costs, because it ain't just the vehicle, it's the gas, it's the insurance, it's the maintenance. And I think I saw the IRS for July 1st is up to like 68 cents or 62 cents a mile, is what the reimbursement rate is. That's insane when you think about how much we're spending on just transportation. What else that could go to.
Yeah, well, that's actually one next thing I wanted to ask about is the budget, right? So some of the reasons why people drive are those incentives the government does. The federal government heavily incentivizes driving a lot of ways. And when I tried to look up the budget for this region between transportation, driving, and other modes, I couldn't find a convenient pie chart somewhere that broke it all down. I'm curious, is there, I think maybe this is more for Anna than for Rich, but Anna could probably answer it. Is there an awareness of how, kind of like percentage-wise, what we're spending on the different mode shares? And is there a goal or a plan to kind of move that needle, maybe fill the transit bucket a little bit more and cut back on the car bucket?
There's actually a cost of living calculator on Greater Rochester Enterprise's website. I used to work there before I joined the county, and I worked with that team to incorporate that widget onto the web page. It helps you compare cost of living and getting around in Rochester to other markets. And so I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head, but I can say that we do spend a lot more on gasoline and car maintenance here than you see in coastal metropolitan areas that are better served by transit. But that's at the rochesterbiz.com webpage, so I can point you in that direction. But that's a short answer. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but the data is out there.
That's great. And I'm wondering, just like on the county budget side, are there talks about let's increase what we're paying into transit, let's decrease what we're paying into different types of road. And it's kind of a hard question right now with the current kind of sorry state of our driving infrastructure, but
right. And this administration started in January 2020, and I started in February of that year, and then March was when we got the first COVID case. And we were all about crisis management from that point forward until really kind of now. So the whole set of priorities that we were working from in our transition report kind of had to sit on a shelf for a while. And now we're looking more strategically ahead at the future. I think moving forward, that is something that's going to factor into our policy making.
Great. And I just want to note, both you and Rich are very new in your, I think that I appreciate that you're frustrated by where things are at now, but I think everyone's aware.
We'll get there.
I'll
get there.
It's some big changes.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. I mean, it's not so much the local budgets; it's the federal budget. One of the things that always just irks me is when people say that we invest in highways, but we subsidize public transportation. That's terrible language. All of these things are subsidized. We are subsidizing drivers with what we put in the roads. And a great example, and unless it's changed, the Federal Transit Administration has what they call their New Starts program, or their Capital Investment Grant, CIG. And this is great because if you want to go and build a new highway, you can probably get, if you want to use your formula funds, you can use up to 80% of them. You can go and apply for up to 80%. Your share of local, the higher the share, you might do better with, right? But when you go for a capital investment grant for transit, 80%, but the successful ones are like 50-50. You're not seeing that with highways and bridges on a lot of these programs. People may do it to be more competitive. It might, be a slightly different shift in the funding. But the federal government, I mean, that's definitely a way. And I don't know. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I can tell you the Federal Transit Administration's budget is significantly less than the Federal Highway Administration's by a lot. It's not close.
And I mean, I'll turn to Miguel now. Kind of just on this whole technology improvement thing. I know you guys launched the transit app for RTS. Could you talk a little bit about what that app lets you do now that you guys couldn't do before, and maybe if there are other technologies coming to the bus system?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, transit app is used across the country. It's not our app per se. So you're just one of the systems that use that app. But the beauty of it is integrating that app with other services and other technology. So what we're going through right now, and by the way, the transit app is for you to plan your trip, right? What we're going through right now is integrating that so that, just like you saw in the film, is mobility as a service, so that you just plan your trip regardless of the mobility method you use or what network. It's just one network. And so integrating that with our on-demand service, integrating that with the bike share and the scooters, Uber, Lyft, doesn't matter what the method is, it's all in one app, and you can also pay for that trip just using one platform. So that's our vision and what we're working on currently. It's becoming real, and that's what we're working towards at this point.
If you haven't used it, I can attest it is very easy to use. When I came here for my job interview, I didn't have a car, and I used the Transat to get around everywhere. But I took the bus. It was middle of winter, there weren't any bikes to rent, but I would have used it for that too.
Awesome,
So,
that's great.
yeah. We do have some questions. Let me start. Oh, perfect. Okay, this is perfect. The film and much of our discussion has focused on the city environment. What do we have to do? Oh, this person is asking, when do we have the conversation about deconstructing the suburbs? Because they're often wasteful and built on racism. No offense to who lives in the suburbs, right? But this is, when urban renewal happened and white flight, that's true. That's a big part of the legacy of the suburbs. I think you've spoken a little bit about not act like you're not out there with a sledgehammer, but you're saying the people who are moving here will likely, many of them will move to the suburbs and will make the suburbs a different environment. Is that accurate, would you say?
Oh, yes. So right now what you're observing is, the suburbs, particularly those suburbs in Greater Rochester that were pioneers of redlining and of urban renewal, white flight, escaping to the greener pastures of the suburb. Those are becoming the more cost-effective places for young people to live, for first-time home buyers to live, for young people who are starting families, for people that are moving to Rochester from other metropolitan areas. For instance, I live in the town of Chila. I lived in the city for many, many years. I grew up in the town of Pittsburgh. Chila was, when my husband and I bought our house there, it was the most affordable place for us to find a house. And I'm starting to see there's a transformation. The demographics are starting to shift where we live. The demographics are also starting to shift in other suburbs. It's a slow evolution, I think. But to the original question, Rochester was one of the first cities in the United States that really developed this. Well, we were one of the first cities in the United States that built the highways and the freeways and built suburban shopping malls. And we were early adopters of urban renewal. And we came to learn an important lesson from all of that in the long term. And I think we can become an early adopter and a pioneer in the next phase and try to kind of reset. Mm-hmm.
Our next question is one that I'm sure a lot of people have in the back of their head, even if they didn't ask it. People are saying they didn't see snow in the movie. And I know, so I listened to Connections. I heard you were asked about snow issues with bus stops. So I can tell you guys, I think probably a lot of you can bike in the winter with the right gear and equipment. So I'm gonna focus on the bus right now and just ask you to talk a little bit about the challenges that you guys are dealing with bad weather, with bus stops and shoveling. Because I don't know that everyone here has heard you talk about this.
Well, I don't have to say it. It's extremely challenging. And we, it's funny, I just started looking, it is a challenge, and I obviously have peers across the industry, across the United States, and we talk about this, and Rochester is one of the snowiest cities in the world. Okay, definitely in the top 10 in the US. I mean, it's very difficult to manage when you are, constantly trying to clear snow and making sure that it's safe. So, we have upwards of 1,500 bus stops, some of them with shelters, as you'll know. Right now, our focus is making sure that those are safe, are accessible. We're working with the city. We just Yes, but no, we both agreed to go together for a grant to work on adding amenities and fixing some of our bus stops. So we're working on that level. But Rich, to his credit, pretty soon after he became commissioner, reached out and said, "Hey, what can we do so that we really clear up and work on the busiest bus stops? Can you send me a list? Can I take a look? And let's also look not only the busiest bus stops, but where are they located? The ones that are located close to living centers or places where we know there's a community of people with disabilities." So very strategic, which is great, so that we can really start addressing these issues in a way that makes sense in a strategic way, because it is a big challenge.
Yeah, and it's going to be collaborative. Hold on, there'll be more coming on clearing of bus stops starting next winter. And Abby will attest to this too. The other issue that we're dealing with is much more severe storms as a result of climate change. So when it comes down, and it poses issues for every community that has to address it. But for those individuals that are using public transportation, whether they're a discretionary rider or not, a choice rider or not, we've got to get to that. And we've known that I think it's been the thing that hasn't been tackled yet. But I think between the RGRTA board and Bill Carpenter as the CEO and Malik Evans as mayor, we're going to get this done. So stay tuned for a bit more on that.
Our next question, I think the answer is going to be that you just started this job 5 months ago, right? But we'll see. So the question is there a rhetoric gap between what we're seeing in the film and kind of our bigger plans, and the person says, with the money that's being spent, why isn't a tree-lined, walkable, bikeable corridor up the river to High Falls kind of priority number one? And my sense is you are currently working on that, right? That is, I see all the construction going on.
There is, and that's a great question because it's one that's been out there for a while. And I think the key here is that we have Rock the Riverway, and again, when we talk about going from High Fall, everywhere along the river, which is where we want to get people there. It's an attractive route. Not all of our projects connect and line up, and so this is really where we need to take a systems versus a project approach. And so again, we've come in with things that have been in various stages of progress and development. But as we look at the Interloop North planning study, and we have a draft, and we're incorporating comments that we've received there. There's definitely a need for us to look at that, and it will happen as part of the preliminary design of the project. So we have a planning study now, and I would say that planning study, its key was to show that we can remove that portion of the interloop. That's the key. I mean, all of this is moot if we can't say that we can address the perceived traffic issues. And that's why we haven't incorporated the disappearance effect. We've taken the conservative approach of going, no, we can handle this. And we've had to work with our partners at the State Department of Transportation because of the connection to I-490 and the number of vehicles that will be redistributed when that's not, a highway. I mean, in addition to us having more land to be able to make developable through this, there's also the issue of this portion of the Interloop carries a lot more traffic than the Interloop East. Interloop East was one of those ones where, you could go out there in peak periods, you weren't going to see that many cars out there. If you went out there non-peak periods, you probably, not that anybody should have, but you could have ran across it. So this is going to be quite a bit different. But no, I think that connection is all about having something that's convenient and safe for non-motorized users. And that's the key. And one of the things I want to make sure that we work on at the city is we need to remove alternative transportation from our lexicon. I worked at a consulting firm, TY Lin, before this, and we had one of the former commissioner of Public Works in Chicago, John LaPlante, who passed away during COVID. And John had a saying, he said, calling biking and walking alternative forms of transportation, it's like calling women alternative men. So it doesn't work like that. They are all equal. We have to make them equal because we have gotten out of balance. So no, that's a great question. It's something we have to work on. It's something we have to figure out in design as we get into that, because at that point in time, we'll be getting much more into what are our physical constraints, particularly related to the environment, stabilization, all those other things. So
that's great. That's great to as someone who bikes that way often with the toddler. I'm glad to hear that will be a great route. Our next question is focused on actively seeking out the voices of non-drivers in the planning process, but I kind of want to ask Abby and Anna, maybe you focus on the non-drivers, and if you could talk a little bit about, if both of you talk a little bit about how you make the space to bring in people who are usually left out. So you know, non-drivers are part of that group. So
one thing I'll mention that I was probably remiss not to mention earlier is we have recently completed a process that took a little over a year of engaging in this conversation, not specifically, or I should say only about transportation, but about climate change in general and what a regional approach to addressing climate change would look like. So we have developed a regional climate action strategy. I invite you to go check that out. And of course, transportation makes up a significant chunk of what we're focusing on there, because as I said, it's a big chunk of our local emissions. But through that process, you know, we recognizing that, you know, that the solution has to match the problem, right? And if you don't engage in the community, with the community members and hear from that diverse range of voices, and again, we were looking regionally, meaning 9-county region, which we have amazing diversity of people and perspectives and backgrounds. So we really did make an effort to prioritize hearing from a lot of different groups, including farm workers, low-income rural residents, low-income urban residents, economic development folks, municipal leaders, wide range, right? Because we needed to make sure that we were deeply understanding what the systemic barriers to progress are. How do you do that? Well, you go out and ask. I mean, you got to start by asking and finding where people are, trying to go to them when possible. I will say that, you know, given, again, the number of people, the size of our region, the diversity, I wish we could have done more. I wish we had done more. We don't feel like it was sufficient. It will kind of almost never be sufficient. But we're moving in the same right direction, I think, in terms of getting more and more people engaged in this conversation and even understanding the issues when you think intersectionally, to understand what each other's perspectives are and why my interest in one specific solution, maybe it's taking a sledgehammer to the suburbs, might not work for someone else, or why even biking in winter might not be practical for someone else, you know? So we have to be having these robust community-wide conversations where we're listening to each other in order to come up with solutions that aren't gonna be perfect, no silver bullet, but that will be, you know, the best path forward to meet our collective needs.
So Abby mentioned finding people where they are. Non-drivers in Monroe County are everywhere, and so we have to be everywhere when we're trying to drive up public engagement in our active transportation plan and our comprehensive plan. What we did in the past, it was a little less than a year ago, we created a community liaison role within the Department of Planning and Development. So there's a woman named Cynthia Adele on our team whose full-time job is figuring out which events, which community groups, where we should be engaging, with which we should be engaging to encourage and gin up public participation in these processes. So for the active transportation plan, we're going to be at the Jazz Festival. We were at the Lilac Festival. It's really great that festival season is upon us and people are coming together once again because we have these opportunities. We are having a public workshop on June 29th. We're working with really adept consultants on blasting the word out and just rolling up our sleeves and trying to get on the streets and find people who whose voices should contribute to our planning efforts.
Great. Thank you all so much. I think we are just about out of time. So I just want to thank all of you and thanks everyone for coming out. I hope you enjoyed the movie and the conversation.
Thank Thank you, David, and thank you to all our panelists. It's great to be able to have this conversation in person, and it's great to hear about all the collaboration that's taking place, because it's really going to take a team effort to get this work done. So thank you very much. And thanks, Abby, for mentioning a survey, because we have a survey of our own. Help us make Street Films a better program. So if you take a look at inside your program, you will have a small survey you can fill out by pen and paper if that's your choice, or there's also a link so you can fill out the survey online. And also in your program, you will find a Hopper credit, $20 credit provided by Hopper for bike share and e-scooters. And please stop at the table outside to thank Hopper for that great incentive. Also outside, we have FlowShare, the electric car share program, which was mentioned earlier by Rich. We have the Monroe County Active Transportation Plan and the City of Rochester Active Transportation Plan, so stop by and get engaged with those actions taking place. And of course, we have Reconnect Rochester and the Climate Solutions Accelerator, so stop by and figure out how you can get involved with our work. Finally, again, thank you to the Climate Solutions Accelerator for being a partner with us on this, and to the Community Foundation and Senator Summerbrook for helping us put this event together. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, have a good night.